Hi, I'm Troy from Studio 33 Guitar, and welcome back to the brand new beginner series. This is part number 4. And so far we've talked about a number of things, including how to hold the guitar and how to hold a pick, how to strum properly, and you've learned your first chords and some really valuable strumming patterns. Now we're going to look at a few more chords and then apply those strumming patterns to those chords. At the end of this lesson, I'll also give you some examples of songs that you can play using these 3 chords and these strumming patterns. If you haven't watched the 3 previous parts to this series, I'll put the link in the description below, so make sure you check those out. Also, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next lesson. Let's zoom in on the neck and have a look at how to play these chords. The first chord we're going to look at is a G major chord, and that's going to look like this. Now there's a number of different ways to play a G major chord. The way that I'm going to show you here is how I recommend it, and I'll explain why as we go along. We'll start with our middle finger on the 3rd fret of the low E string. And then our index finger will go on the 2nd fret of the next string. Then we'll leave the next 2 strings open. Then our ring finger goes on the 3rd fret of the B string, and our pinky finger directly below it on the high E string. So we end up with this. Like we've talked about with the other chords, make sure that you get a good curl around to your fingers so that you're playing with your fingertips so you don't block out those open strings or interfere with any of the other notes. So as you strum through that chord, if you end up getting that kind of a sound, then make some adjustments with your wrist and your arm until you're getting your fingers playing with just the fingertips. So in this case, this index finger was lying too flat and it was making this open string clunky. So I was getting this, that sound. Once I bring my hand around so that my fingers are playing with the fingertips, then the fingers get out of the way of those other strings and the chord sounds a lot smoother. You may have learned a G chord before and you may have seen the fingering just a little bit different. Sometimes these 2 notes up here are not both played. Sometimes you would play the rest of the chord the same way, but you would have just your ring finger down on this highest note. And that's correct. That is also a way to play a G major chord. You could also play that with the pinky finger and have your ring finger up. Those are also G chords. But I usually recommend playing the chord this way with both of these fingers down. And the reason for that is there's other chords that we're going to learn that have those fingers in that same spot. And so it makes it really nice and easy for making chord changes if you have those fingers in the same position for different chords. It makes the changes a lot smoother. So now let's move on to the second chord. Now this one is going to be what's called a C add 9. And the nice thing about this chord is it looks identical to this G chord, except we're going to move our index and middle finger both down 1 string. Everything else stays the same. So that sounds like this. For that chord, we don't want to play this low E string. So typically what I will do is use my middle finger just to nudge up against that low E string to keep it from ringing. So if my pick hits that string, it's not going to ring out. So you can actually strum all 6 strings and you won't hear that low E note. As I mentioned, that's called a C add 9 chord. Now we're not going to get into the theory behind why it's called that today, but if you want more information about that and more theory lessons, you can check out our website. We've got some courses there and some lessons that go into a little bit more detail about the theory behind what we're learning here. But for now, it's important to know that a C add 9 chord is a version of a C major chord. So if you're looking at a chord chart online, you're trying to learn a song and it says C major, you can substitute a C add 9 chord for that C major and it will sound great. The exception to that would be if the song you're learning uses specific notes from the C major chord. So if it was some sort of a finger picking type of thing that needed to have some of those notes from a regular C major chord, then the C add 9 may not work. But for most cases, when you're strumming, the C add 9 chord will fit perfectly. The first thing we want to do is practice the chord change from that G chord to that C chord. And like I said, that's a nice, easy change because the chord looks identical. these two fingers are going to stay in the same position, and we're just going to move these two fingers down one string. So let's practice changing from the G chord to the C chord using that strumming pattern that we learned in lesson number 2. And if you recall, that was the one that went like this: down, down, up, up, down, up. So let's play that strumming pattern with these chords. We'll play 2 bars of G and then 2 bars of C. So that sequence, we're going to play 2 times for each chord. So that's going to sound like this. Now let's have a look at the third chord we're going to learn today. This is the D major chord, and that's going to look like this. For the D major chord, we don't want to play these 2 lowest strings. So the E string and the A string, we just want to skip over those, and we're going to start on the D string and move down. So for the fingering on this chord, you'll notice that the ring finger is in that same spot that it was for the 2 other chords. And again, that's why I recommend playing the G chord this way and that C add 9 this way, because that enables you to keep that ring finger there for all 3 of these chords. Next, what we want to do is move our index finger to the 2nd fret on the next string up. And then our middle finger is going to go on the 2nd fret of the high E string. So together, it looks like this. Now again, make sure that you're playing with your fingertips, especially this ring finger, because it has a tendency to lay a little bit flat, and it may cause that high E string to not come out properly. So make sure that you've got a good curl around to those fingers. You're playing with your fingertips. Like we've talked about before, when you're changing from one chord to another, you want to try and make as little movement as possible. So don't lift your fingers too far off the strings. Try and leave them low so that you're not having to move very far. And it's good to practice changing chords from one to another without even strumming. Just sit there with the guitar and start moving your fingers from one chord to another and work on getting those shapes quickly and easily. What might help you is to keep that pinky finger down and just work on moving back and forth with just these 2 fingers first. And once you have those moving quickly and smoothly, then you can work on lifting the pinky finger off. Now let's practice going from G to D with that same strumming pattern we were just using. If that was a little bit quick, you can slow that down and take it at your own pace. The other thing you can do is simplify that strumming pattern for now. The more important thing is to be able to make those chord changes really smoothly and quickly. So if you need to simplify the strumming hand until you can get those chord changes a little bit quicker, and then you can add in a more complicated strum. So if you want, you could go back and just do strictly down strums, just 1, 2, 3, 4, and then switch to the next chord, or go 8 times, count to 4 twice, and then switch to the next chord. Make it really simple. Don't try and take on too much at once. Simplify things, get comfortable with that, and then move on to something a little bit more complicated. Now it's time for us to put all 3 of those chords together. We're gonna play a chord progression of G to D to C. And this is gonna be just like it's done in Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Let's take a look at that. The strumming pattern we're using for this is the same one that we learned in the last lesson. And that is when we're playing 1, 2, and a, 3, 4, and a. So in other words, that's down, 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 up, down, 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 up. For this chord progression, we're going to play that strumming pattern one time through for the G chord, and then one time through for the D chord, and then 2 times through for the C chord. So technically what we're doing here is we're playing half a bar of G, half a bar of D, and then a full bar of C. So I'll count that out for you so you can see how that looks. 1, 2, and a 3, 4, and a 1, 2, and a 3, 4, and a 1, 2, and a 3, 4, and a 1, 2, and a 3, 4, and a... As I mentioned, with those 3 chords and the strumming patterns that we've learned, you can play a lot of different songs. You can mix up the order of the chords, whether you play from G to D or G to C or start on D and then go to C, whatever combination you want to use to come up with different sounds. Here's some examples of what you can do with those 3 chords. You might recognize some famous songs. There's lots of other songs that use those 3 chords, but that'll give you a good start. If you found this information useful, please hit the like button so that I know that you want more lessons like this. And don't miss our next lesson by hitting that subscribe button so you know when it comes out. We'll see you next time.